Grand Rising, everybody. Grand Rising. Three, four, six, eight. Ladies and gentlemen, my only big money pattern on fire I promised would manifest between the dates 1/8 and 1/16 in Tennessee. Ladies and gentlemen, 8463. Boom, 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 boom. Ladies and gentlemen, 8463. Just like I called it. Promised. Number one, big money pattern. And I said it would manifest the same day, 1/12. Ladies and gentlemen, you got your 777s. Ladies and gentlemen, 777s, black sheep, black sheep. I told you, hardly anyone would be investing or playing that big money pattern combination. Ladies and gentlemen, 415. Ladies and gentlemen, 415. Black sheep, straight. For 16 to 114. Ladies and gentlemen, I guaranteed specifically my number 4 big money pattern would manifest in Ohio on 1/12. Ladies and gentlemen, I promised my VIP the number 1 big money pattern would manifest on 1/12. Ladies and gentlemen, 3617 in Michigan. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise my VIP, look, to win, you must focus on my top 5 4 digits, which I promise the first 2 big money patterns will manifest between the dates 16 and 114 in Michigan. Ladies and gentlemen, 937. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise my VIP the number 1 big money pattern would manifest by the deadline date. 460 for Florida, number 1 big money pattern. I promise my VIP, look, between the dates 17 and 115 to win. Focus on my top 5 3 digits, which I promise the first 2. Ladies and gentlemen, 4328. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise my VIP by the deadline date that big money pattern would manifest. Remember, yesterday I went over about my deadline date. Today, the deadline date is the 13th. Do with it what you will. Ladies and gentlemen, 143. Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, I promise my VIP. Look, to win, it is a prerequisite to know this. In order to join my VIP, you need to focus on the top 5 3 digits or 4 digits, which I promise the triple dollar signs will manifest 15 to 114 in North Carolina. Congratulations, Big Money West. 109, ladies and gentlemen, I promise my VIP, my number 1 big money pattern would manifest straight between the dates 19 and 117. Ladies and gentlemen, 4017. Ladies and gentlemen, my only big money pattern on fire. I told my VIP, hey, look, you're going to see this combination over and over and over again. You see it between the dates 1-5 and 113, only big money pattern on fire. Ladies and gentlemen, 782. Ladies and gentlemen, I promised my VIP that I could make manifest 782 between the dates 19 and 117. Ladies and gentlemen, 611. Ladies and gentlemen, my only big money pattern on fire, 611. I promised it would debut between the dates 14 and 113. Ladies and gentlemen, quad ones. Ladies and gentlemen, how many people remember watching my live yesterday? That was the first quad I gave you. I told you, quad ones. How many people remember this? How many people remember me telling you quad ones? Ladies and gentlemen, 4520. Ladies and gentlemen, I promised my VIP that I could make manifest 4520 straight between the dates 14 and 113. You see it for yourself. Here I go showing off. I guaranteed straight 4520. My numbers don't lie. Ladies and gentlemen, 196. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise my VIP. Look, 196 will manifest between the dates 110 and 118. Straight! Ladies and gentlemen, 093. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise my VIP that I could make manifest 093. Number one big money pattern. But y'all don't hear me though. Ladies and gentlemen, 2094. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise my VIP, my top two, would manifest between the dates 15 and 113 in North Carolina. Here I go showing off. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise my VIP that the very last number you see will manifest first. Boom, 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 in North Carolina. Ladies and gentlemen, here I go again, over and over and over again, by the motherfucking deadline date. Fire! 5-year-old can pick out fire. Look at me go! Woo! Y'all see this for yourself. 17 to 115, 2490. Ladies and gentlemen, look at this. Boom, boom, boom. Proof. Y'all see it by the deadline date. How many times I got to give it to you? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it was over 5 times. I just got tired. Ladies and gentlemen, 6214. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise my VIP. Hey, look, look, look. Focus. You have to focus on the top 5. Which I promise the first 2 will manifest. 112, same day. Woo! Ladies and gentlemen, 4170. Y'all see it for yourself. Number 1 motherfucking big money pattern. Woo! Ladies and gentlemen, 075. Ladies and gentlemen, you see triple dollar sign for 112. Same motherfucking day. Ladies and gentlemen, 884. Ladies and gentlemen, you see it for yourself. Black sheep manifest on time. Straight. Ladies and gentlemen, 235. Ladies and gentlemen, I guaranteed my number 4 big money pattern would manifest straight on 112. Between the dates 16 and 114 in Texas, for Texas. That was for Texas. Ladies and gentlemen, You got your 089. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise my VIP, the number one motherfucking big money pattern would manifest on 112. You see it for yourself. Ladies and gentlemen, you have your 084. Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, my number one motherfucking big money pattern will manifest. 112, I told them to invest in it between the dates 16 and 114. Ladies and gentlemen, here I go showing off black sheep on time, straight. Woo! Ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. Watch out for 1903. Watch out for 612. Watch out for 5347, 6458, 9781, 167. You got 723, 834. Watch out for 459, 671. Look at that. 671, 167. Boom, boom, boom. 459, 945. Boom, boom, boom. Watch out for 4528. Watch out for 5639. For you 5-digit players, 81955, 79940, 91156, and 09748. Watch out for deuces. Watch out for 7s, 8s, and 0s. I will see everybody at the winner's table no matter what. If you understood my prerequisite, email me, tell me what that prerequisite is, then you may go and shop on dynamicpredictions.onrender.com. I'm going to see everybody at the winner's table no matter what. Abundant prosperity in health and in wealth to all who follow me and believe in the hard work that you see me accomplishing every single day. I'm going to try to return around about 10:35 with Tennessee, and then Texas will follow it around about 11. And then Georgia around about 12:30, and then Ohio around about 12:35, 12:40, then Michigan around about 1:10, and Florida around about 10 minutes to 2, North Carolina about 10 minutes after 3. Again, I love you all, and I appreciate the time that you guys give me to check out the big money patterns that will be moving forward. And I really appreciate the gifts that I've been receiving. That does let me know that there are some people who value my work and are really listening to me.